My son sent me a message. You're not invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want to see you. Just like that, after I paid for their new house. I replied with a simple, okay. Then I went and canceled every payment, all 174 of them. They started calling, but I didn't answer. Before we go on, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. Now, enjoy the story. I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress. It didn't need fixing. It was always neat. This was my regular family dinner dress. Nothing flashy to provoke Irina, my daughter-in-law, but not too casual either. At 77, I wasn't chasing trends anymore, but I've always been tidy. That's just who I am, even if there's no one left to notice. Anton said dinner would start at 7. It was only 6. I walked around the room a bit. Everything in it felt like a museum of my life. A photo of me and Alexander from our golden anniversary. Little Anton with his first fish. Yegor and Liza at their graduations. These photos reminded me. Things used to be different, warmer, easier to understand. My gaze paused on Alexander's photo. He'd been gone for 15 years, but I still talked to him in my head. Zina, don't let them walk all over you, he used to say. He knew how to draw the line, even with Anton. I never could. The phone buzzed. A message from Anton. I put on my glasses, thinking maybe he was checking the time, or maybe, though unlikely, offering a ride. Instead, Mom, sorry, tonight's not going to work. Irina planned a dinner for her coworkers. We'll reschedule? Strange. Just yesterday he insisted I come. Said there'd be big news. Something felt off. Then another message came. You're not invited. Irina doesn't want you there. The phone trembled in my hands like it had turned to ice. The message was from Anton's number, from his name. I slowly sat down, still holding the phone like it was the last, fragile thread tying me to something real. Memories flooded in. Anton clinging to my skirt at preschool, asking for advice about what to buy a girl. Then bringing Irina home for the first time, glowing with happiness. And now, this, a cold, clipped message, like from a stranger. Was it a sudden change? Or had they felt this way for a while and finally said it out loud? How many smiles were fake? How many invitations just politeness? I glanced at the brochure on the table, the ad for their new townhouse. 3 floors, private dock, riverside view, the home I paid for, $120,000, 6 months ago. Mom, it's an investment, Anton said. You'll have your own space there. My own space? I laughed bitterly. That space had clearly disappeared long ago. I remember sitting in the bank, finalizing everything. The bank clerk looked at me like I was crazy. Are you sure, Mrs. Kovaleva? That's a large amount. I was sure. Alexander had left me more than enough. I wanted to help our son. That's what mothers do, right? And then came the rest. The safer car for the kids, private school for Yegor with his special needs, the new kitchen for Irina because she worked hard and was tired. Every time, I wrote the check quietly, believing I was doing the right thing. What did I get in return? Scheduled holiday calls, short, polite visits, and now, a message that I'm not welcome. No apology, nothing. I stood up and walked to the bureau, opened the top drawer. Everything was organized. Folders, documents, receipts. The folder labeled Anton was the thickest. Inside, a check for a failed business, tuition for Irina's classes, roof repairs, car insurance, kitchen remodels, private dentistry. I couldn't even remember everything I'd paid for. I did it all for the family. And now, I wasn't welcome at the very doorstep of the house I helped build. The phone buzzed again. My heart jumped. But it was Liza, my granddaughter. Grandma, are you coming tonight? I miss you. My hand froze above the screen. Liza had always been different, sincere. Even when the rest seemed to forget I existed, she always found time for me. I replied, Sweetheart, it looks like your parents think I should stay home tonight. Her answer came instantly. What? Dad told me you had to be there. So she didn't know. I imagined her, confused, standing in a house bought with my money, waiting for someone her parents had shut out. My eyes dropped again to the folder. All this time, I thought that if I gave enough, they'd respect me, maybe love me. But the truth, I was just renting their attention, and my lease was up. I picked up the phone and called the bank. Bank Nadiez. Good evening. How can I help you? Yes, this is Zinaida Petrovna Kovaleva. I need assistance with canceling automatic payments. Of course, I'll just need to verify your identity. While she asked the usual questions, the plan took shape in my mind. Cool, focused, final. Once verified, she asked what I wanted to do. Cancel all transfers, every single one, and revoke the power of attorney for my son, Anton Kovalev. Silence on the line. All of them? That's quite a lot. Everyone. Today, I'll come in tomorrow to sign whatever's needed. Understood. We'll temporarily suspend everything for now. Start now, I said. As she typed, I looked back at Alexander's photo. You were right, Sasha. You can't let people treat you like a doormat, not even your own. It's done, Mrs. Kovaleva. All 174 payments have been paused. 174? I repeated. I had no idea there were so many. After the call, I sat still in my chair. My hands trembled slightly. But inside, there was peace. A weight I'd carried for years had finally slipped off. I didn't cry. I just sat there, in my apartment, in the quiet, surrounded by old photographs, worn furniture, the soft scent of vanilla and paper. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd done something just for me. Not for my son, not for my grandson, not to keep peace in the family. Just for me. The phone buzzed again. A message from Anton. Liza must have said something to him, but I didn't open it. I wasn't about to explain myself or apologize anymore. I opened a new message instead and typed a single line. From now on, you pay for everything yourselves. My finger hovered over send. Honestly, I didn't want to sound cruel. But they started this. I didn't bring the cold. They decided I was no longer welcome. Even in the house I bought. They chose to be strangers. I simply accepted it. I pressed send, then turned off the phone. Silence. Peace. Evening had started to settle outside. Soft light spilled across the windowsill. I got up, walked to the closet, took off the dress I'd put on for dinner, slipped into my robe, and put the kettle on. The kitchen felt warm, smelled faintly of apples. I pulled out an old photo album, flipping through it. My wedding with Alexander, baby Anton in his father's arms, us at the cottage, on trips, in cafes. So many years, all captured in these pages. I saw myself, young, busy, always doing something for someone. I had always put things off. My dreams, my wants, always helping someone else. First Alexander, then our son, then his family. I had always put myself last. Alexander used to say, Zina, don't let people use you, not even family. Before he passed, he made me promise to take care of myself the way I always took care of others. I nodded back then, but deep down, I thought, who would need me if I stopped giving? Now I knew. I needed me. I closed the album and returned to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, pulled out the book I'd been meaning to read for years. I always put it off, eager to help with Igor's illness, Irina's courses, family obligations. But now, I could read whenever I wanted. I could live the way I wanted. No expectations, no requests, no constant role of the rescuer. In the morning, I woke up with no alarm, no calls, no to-do list. I had slept well, no pills, no valerian drops. I had breakfast, simple but satisfying. Looked out the window. The day was bright, and for the first time in a long while, my chest didn't feel heavy. I arrived at the bank 20 minutes before it opened. The street was quiet. I stood in my coat, folder in hand. People walked past, unaware that this, for me, was a special day, the day I took my life back. When the doors opened, I stepped inside. A woman behind the counter greeted me with a polite smile. Good morning. How can I help? I need Lydia Mikhailovna, I said. We've known each other nearly 30 years. She used to manage our accounts when Alexander was still alive. Always meticulous, reliable. In a few minutes, I was sitting in her office. She hadn't changed much, still the same neat hairstyle, thin-framed glasses. Zinaida Petrovna, she nodded. I got the call. All payments are paused. Is something wrong? I looked her in the eyes. I want to cancel them permanently and revoke Anton's access to my accounts. She took off her glasses, wiping them with a handkerchief, a habit she had whenever something serious came up. We've known each other a long time. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm sure, I said calmly. She nodded, sat at her computer, and began typing. All right, I'll prepare the paperwork. It may take a while. You have a lot of active payments. While she worked, she handed me a thick folder. These are the records of your regular transactions for the past year. Please review them. You might want to keep some. I opened it. First line, mortgage for Anton and Irina's house. $3,800 a month. The house I wasn't even allowed to spend the night in. Then car insurance for Irina. That premium model she said was necessary so clients wouldn't be embarrassed. $850 per quarter. A club membership, for networking, of course. Orthodontist for Yegor. He had jaw alignment issues. College tuition for Liza, the only one I didn't regret for a second. Every line told a story, a conversation, a request. Sometimes tears, sometimes guilt trips. Mom, we're really struggling. Grandma, don't you want me to have what others do? Then more. Renovations, club fees, travel costs, tutors, gym memberships. I sat there flipping pages. It was the map of my naivety, page after page, of how I had handed myself over to people who never truly valued it. Here are the documents, said Lydia Mikhailovna. Review and sign when ready. There was also the form to cancel power of attorney. I signed, without hesitation, without trembling. "If you ever need advice or support, call me," she said gently, then paused, studying me. "You look different today." I smiled. For the first time in ages, it was real. "I'm okay, Lydia. Finally okay." After the bank, I went straight to my lawyer, Oleg Kuznetsov, our longtime family attorney. He handled Alexander's affairs back in the day. His beard was fuller, his glasses thicker, but his voice hadn't changed. Calm, respectful. "Zinaida Petrovna, what a surprise," he said, rising from behind his desk. "What brings you in?" "I want to revise my will," I said plainly, "and establish an irrevocable trust. I want to make sure my assets can't be touched without my consent." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. "Family matters?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied. I didn't feel like explaining again. Not today. I just wanted to move forward. "All right," he said. "Let's go through what you'd like to secure." We spent the next hour with documents. He explained how a trust worked, how control could be preserved, how to reduce risk. I asked questions, listened. Oddly enough, I felt no fear, no second guessing, only clarity, only the need to protect myself, not others, just me. When we finished, I looked at my phone. 15 missed calls from Anton, 7 from Irina, 3 from Yegor, not a single one from Liza. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Liza always knew when to wait. "Will the documents be ready by the end of the week?" I asked as I stood. "Of course," Oleg nodded, then paused. "Zinaida Petrovna, yes? Alexander always said you were stronger than you looked." I'm glad he was right. I gave a small nod. I didn't want to cry in his office. On the way home, I stopped by the store. For the first time in years, I shopped just for myself, bought the foods I liked, didn't think about whether Anton would eat them, didn't remember what snacks Yegor preferred, just for me, a small thing, but it made me feel proud. At home, a surprise was waiting. Liza sat on the front steps, hugging her knees. As soon as she saw my car, she ran over. "Grandma, I've been calling you all day. Why didn't you answer?" "Because I had an important day, sweetheart. Help me with the bags?" She grabbed a bag and followed me inside. "Dad's freaking out," she said immediately. "He says you blocked everything. What happened?" I set the kettle on. The house felt calm. I didn't rush to reply. Just unpacked the groceries, put them away slowly, carefully. "Yes," I said. "I stopped all the payments. I'm tired. I just can't anymore. Not emotionally, not financially. That's it." Liza froze. "Did something happen?" I turned to her, looked her in the eyes. "Yesterday, your father canceled my place at the family dinner. He said Irina didn't want me there, in the house I paid for." Liza's face went pale. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. "What? That's not possible. Dad kept saying all week how important it was for you to come." I showed her the message. I didn't say anything, just handed her the phone. She read it, covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, I didn't know, I swear. That's awful. Grandma, how could they do this?" I placed a cup of tea in front of her. "That's what I thought too. Enough. I've spent years helping, paying, fixing everything, and now I'm not even wanted at their table. So it's time to reevaluate everything." Liza stayed silent. Her lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. "You know," she said quietly, "I've seen it for a while now. How they use you. Especially Mom. I tried to talk to Dad, but he always defends her. Says I don't understand grown-up stuff." I nodded. Deep down, I'd always known Liza saw more than she let on. Maybe she just didn't want to interfere. Maybe she thought I could handle it. "What now?" she asked. "They've got so many expenses. Yegor's school, the mortgage. They'll figure it out," I said simply. "They're adults. Anton has a good job. Irina's a successful realtor. It's enough." The phone buzzed again. "Anton?" I said, switching it to silent. "You're not going to answer?" Liza asked gently. "Not today. Let him think. Maybe for the first time in a while." She looked at me differently. Quiet, focused. "Grandma, I've never seen you like this before. I haven't seen myself like this in years." I smiled. We drank tea, talked about her job, books, her plans. Just talked. No pressure, no favors, no tension. That's what real closeness feels like. That's what family should be. When Liza got up to leave, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Are you sure you're okay? I can stay if you want." "I'm okay, sweetheart. Really. You go. Don't worry." At the door, she paused. "Grandma, I don't want to be caught in the middle. This is between you and them. I'm not taking sides." "I know," I nodded. "This is between me and your parents, not you." After she left, the house went quiet again. I checked the mail. Among the usual notices, an alert, a failed attempt to charge Yegor's school fee. Already? That was quick. Looked like my grandson had been living on the edge. I set the message aside, sat by the window. The phone kept buzzing. I ignored it, just pulled out the old photo album and opened to a random page. A picnic. We were still young. Alexander, little Anton, Irina, back when her hair was in that 90s style. The kids still in diapers, smiles, real ones. Back then, I truly believed we were a real family. When did it all start to slip? When did love become duty? We sat together, and I told Galina everything. The messages, the canceled dinner, how I had finally stopped sending money. She listened without interrupting, frowning only when necessary. When I finished, she reached for my hand and exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for years. She confessed that she'd seen this happening for a long time. She'd wanted to tell me to open my eyes, but knew I wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't offended. She was right. I hadn't wanted to admit it. She said they had used me, especially Irina, who had never truly respected me. And I kept paying, kept forgiving, all for the illusion of peace. We stayed at the table long after the tea had cooled, talking not like mother and grandmother, but as two women who were simply tired of being convenient, tired of being needed only when it was useful. By evening, Galina left, promising to come by again soon. I was alone. The phone rang. Anton. I didn't answer. A moment later, a message appeared from Irina. It was short, urgent, claiming we needed to talk and warning that things had gone too far. She wrote that I didn't understand the consequences. I laughed, bitterly. It was always the same. Only when money was on the line did anyone begin to panic. Not once had they tried to understand what it felt like to be quietly pushed out of a family I had supported for decades. I didn't reply. I simply silenced the phone. The next morning brought a knock at the door I wasn't expecting. On the other side stood Irina, immaculate as ever, holding an elegant box from some overpriced bakery. She entered like nothing had happened, set the box down carefully, and took a seat as though this were her home, not mine. Her tone was soft, measured, like someone rehearsing an explanation meant to placate a difficult child. She claimed it had all been a misunderstanding. Anton hadn't meant to send the message. They'd been under pressure. There was a dinner with clients. She needed everything to be perfect, and in her mind, I could have disrupted it. She tried to smooth it over with excuses about modern etiquette, awkward humor, and my outdated clothes. She acted like she was helping me see what I didn't understand. I let her talk. Then I told her I was no longer financing her life. No more for the house, the car, or Yegor's gym. Her expression froze, disbelief breaking through the mask. She insisted I couldn't do that. We were family, but family meant respect, not transactions. And I hadn't felt respected in years. To them, I had become nothing more than an account balance. When she warned me that I'd regret this when I was old and alone, I stood up and told her I would manage, just like I always had, long before they came to rely on my silence. She rose too, leaving the pastries behind, still believing they might fix something. Before she left, she said this wasn't over, that we were still family. But I knew the truth. They were relatives. Family was something else entirely. When the door closed behind her, I didn't feel anger or vindication. Just quiet relief, like the final thread of manipulation had been cut clean. Later, I made tea. I took out the pastries I liked. Not the ones I used to buy for others, but the kind I enjoyed. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living by my own rules. The next morning, Oleg Kuznetsov arrived right on time. Calmly and methodically, he laid out the documents on my kitchen table. My new will and the irrevocable trust. I signed every page without a tremble. The majority of my assets would now be protected, with me as the sole beneficiary for life. Liza would receive 40% after I passed, 10% would go to charity, and the rest would be distributed as I saw fit. Anton and Yegor were listed with the minimum legal share. Irina was excluded entirely. Oleg confirmed that everything had been handled cleanly. If my family tried to contest it, they'd find no grounds. He said I had done what most people only talked about, and that I'd freed myself. I thanked him. After he left, I stood in the hallway with my hand on the folder. This was what freedom looked like. Not grand gestures, but signatures, boundaries, resolve. The phone rang again. It was Yegor. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was shaky, uncertain. He asked if it was true, if I had really cut off all financial support. I told him it was. He sounded stunned, not angry, just lost, like someone who'd never been asked to stand on his own. I reminded him he was an adult. He had a job. He lived on his own. It was time to take responsibility. He confessed he wasn't coping, but I knew the reason. He'd never learned how to cope because I had always been there to fix everything. I asked if he had ever thought about how that felt for me. The silence that followed said everything. He admitted that he'd only called me twice in the last decade without needing something. Once on New Year's, once for a school form. The rest had always been requests, demands, transfers. When I said no, everything unraveled. He mentioned his card was blocked, his rent unpaid, his car impounded. He couldn't manage. I told him it was his life, his rent, his debt, his consequences. I encouraged him to find solutions, to cut costs, ask for help, work more. Life was hard, especially when you'd grown used to someone else carrying your weight. Then, quietly, he asked if I truly thought he was a bad person. I said no, he wasn't bad, just comfortable, too comfortable. And now, I wanted to live for myself, for once. And then he asked something unexpected, if I would still love him, even if he stopped asking for money. I told him I always would, but my love wasn't for sale. It wasn't something that could be bought with requests. It existed on its own. He told me he had spoken to Mr. Kuznetsov, that he'd accepted a small internship, basic office work, filing, errands. It was a start, and this time, he wanted to try. On his own. I smiled. It was small, but genuine. That was what adulthood sounded like. He thanked me for everything and apologized. Then he hung up. I sat quietly with my tea, the phone finally still. But inside, I didn't feel empty. I felt light, not because the world had fixed itself, but because I had finally stepped out from under it. When I asked him what he wanted, he looked at me the way someone might look at a cashier they can't afford, blank and quietly desperate. What he needed was money. He insisted it wasn't a loan, promised he would pay me back. But I stopped him. He was an adult now, working, fully aware of how grown people live. They pay their own rent, their own bills, and take responsibility for their mistakes. He dropped his gaze and admitted he wasn't managing. But that was only because he'd never had to try. We sat in silence for a while. Then I told him the truth. I wouldn't give him money. But I had spoken to my lawyer. There was a small job available. Nothing glamorous, just files and phones. But it was honest work, and it would help him take his first steps on his own. He looked at me with a strange mix in his eyes, somewhere between wounded and thankful. He asked if I still loved him. I told him I did. But now that love came without wire transfers or financial strings, it was real. The next morning was quiet and unhurried. I woke up early, not out of anxiety, but habit. I made breakfast slowly, brewed coffee, laid out the cookies I liked, not the ones others preferred. The air drifting through the open window carried the early sound of traffic and a hint of spring. I already knew what the day would bring. Anton had called the night before. He said the whole family wanted to talk, calmly, no fights. They would come by at 2. I hadn't argued. I wasn't afraid anymore. Right on time, the bell rang. I looked out. 3 cars parked outside. Irina was first up the steps, polished and poised. Behind her came Anton, Yegor, and Liza, along with a crowd of others. Irina's parents, her sister and her husband, a few people I didn't even recognize. They stood together like they were preparing for a formal intervention. When I opened the door, Irina took the lead, speaking loudly as if she were making an announcement. They were here to talk, as a family. I told them they could come in, but only Anton, Yegor, and Liza. The rest would stay outside. She hesitated, said the others were there for support, to help make decisions together. But I reminded her whose house this was, and that the decision was mine. Either just the 4 of them came in, or no one at all. There was a pause. Irina's face tightened. Anton looked unsure. Yegor avoided my eyes, and Liza stood quietly at the edge. Eventually, Irina gave in. They came inside, and the rest stayed behind, some by the gate, others near the fence, watching like this was a courtroom hearing. In the living room, we sat across from each other. Silence hung thick until Anton finally asked why. Why I'd done this, why I stopped everything so abruptly, why I hadn't spoken to them first. He said it could have been handled differently. I told him this wasn't sudden. I had been quiet for 20 years, and in those years, they had taken and taken without ever stopping to ask how I was doing. Now that I had drawn a line, they weren't worried about me. They were worried about the bills. Irina stepped in, saying it wasn't fear but unfairness, that families were supposed to support one another. I agreed, but support should go both ways, not in just one direction. She threw up her hands and said this was all over one message. I explained that it wasn't the message. That was just the final straw. The problem began long before, when they all started treating my help as something expected. Anton dropped his head. Yegor fidgeted in his seat. Anton admitted they thought it wasn't a big deal, since I always offered. I told him that I had, out of love, but they had mistaken that love for duty. He tried to raise his voice, insisting I couldn't just cut everyone off. But I told him I wasn't cutting them off. I was cutting off the idea that love had to be paid for. I refused to sit quietly in a house I'd paid for, where I was no longer welcome. That was when Irina snapped. She reminded me that my son and grandson lived in that house and that I had given the money voluntarily. I told her I had now chosen, just as voluntarily, to stop. She stood, angry and shaking, yelling that they were losing the house, that Yegor couldn't afford school, that everything was falling apart because of my grudge. I corrected her. This wasn't about a grudge. It was about truth. I was done letting them use me. She crossed her arms and warned me that I'd regret this someday, that I'd be old, alone, and without help or grandchildren. But I told her it would be better to be alone than surrounded by people who only loved my money. The room fell silent. Anton rubbed his forehead. Yegor, for the first time, lifted his head and quietly admitted he had started an internship with Mr. Kuznetsov. He wanted to do things on his own now. He thanked me for the push. Irina turned to him, shocked that he had known. He simply said yes, and that he agreed with me. They had taken things too far. Liza stepped forward and embraced me. She whispered that she was with me, always. I looked at the two of them, Yegor, finally growing, and Liza, already steady and clear. This was my family now. I wasn't pushing anyone away. I was setting boundaries. This wasn't war. It was a grown-up conversation, and I wasn't going back to a place where I wasn't respected. Irina stood frozen, lips tight, eyes burning. She ordered Anton to leave with her. He got up, without a word. They left. Liza stayed for a moment longer, gave me one last hug, then followed them out. When the door shut, I didn't feel proud or victorious, just stillness and relief. 6 months passed. The sun in Tuscany was warm on my skin. I sat on the terrace of a small restaurant, a glass of white wine in one hand, a plate of pasta before me, and the view of endless vineyards stretching toward the hills. There was no rush, no demands, no texts or calls starting with, "Grandma, I need." Across from me, Galina Sergeyevna was scribbling in her notebook, jotting down her thoughts from the day. She had kept her promise and joined me on this trip. I sat back, breathing in the Italian air, thinking how impossible this had once felt. I was 77, and for the first time, I was living exactly the life I had dreamed of. Galina raised her glass and said Alexander would have been proud of me. I smiled and said this wasn't just for me, it was for us, for every woman who had once forgotten herself. So much had changed. Anton and Irina tried everything, pressure, pleading, even guilt. Anton came by with flowers, apologizing, but every visit ended with another ask, and I kept saying no. Eventually, they realized I meant it. Irina left her old job and took up rental work. They sold the house, moved into a smaller apartment, and strangely, it helped them. Without a safety net, they were finally forced to grow up. Yegor now worked steadily with Oleg. He called sometimes, just to ask how I was. No requests, no hidden asks, just genuine connection. Liza and I spoke nearly every day. She had helped plan this trip, picked the route, booked the tickets, even got me a new suitcase. She told me I was finally living, and if I was going to live, I had to do it beautifully. I remembered all those years when I dreamed of silence, good food, and slow mornings. I wasn't doing this for someone else or out of obligation. I was here because I had finally earned it. Galina and I wandered through old towns, tasted cheeses, laughed, took pictures of each other, and every evening, I realized something important. I wasn't alone, because I was finally fully with myself. That night, I sent a message to Liza. I told her Italy was magic, that one day, she had to come, and I'd show her the little alley where they made coffee like in the movies. I told her I loved her. I attached a photo, me standing in front of the vines, in a light shawl, my face lined, and a little tired, but completely alive, completely free. Later, I stepped onto the balcony. Galina was reading. I just watched the sky, deep blue, warm. Somewhere below, crickets sang, and I smiled. I had made it. After years of giving, of being the one who bent first and last, I had said enough. I had chosen myself. I had lived, even if only for the last chapter. The phone buzzed. It was Anton. I didn't answer. Maybe later, maybe never. Right now, I had more important things to do, to live. And if you're still here, tell us in the comments, how old are you and where are you watching from? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There are more true stories ahead.